conference is now being recorded.
Welcome to the New York State Association of School Business Officials webinar. Today's program is School Construction and ARRA. Your host for today is Donna Clement, Director of Professional Development. Operator assistance is available at any time during this conference by pressing £0. Following the presentation, there will be a question and answer session. You may send chat questions at any time during the presentation using the chat window indicated by a speech bubble icon located to the right of the presentation. Please address chat questions to the Q&A group using the drop-down list located at the bottom of the chat window. I will now turn the call over to our host, Donna. You may begin.
Thank you, Leo, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. We have a very distinguished panel here today to supply us with some good information about school construction and how you can get your project shovel-ready and receive monies through ARRA. And our host today for this panel is John Osborne. John, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. It's nice to be here today. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to introduce a panel in a second of people who have worked extensively on school, K-12 school construction and design. We have an engineer, a project management person, an architect, and of course myself, who is a lawyer who helps set up projects for schools and get them shovel ready and so on. But first, before I introduce the panel, what I'd like to do is answer why are we here today, and to go over the basic tenets of how construction projects fit into the ARRA. I want to go over the first slide, which is that New York State schools stand to get a substantial sum of money from the stimulus package that President Obama signed into law in February. The Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, estimates that New York State will receive $2.5 billion in funds designated as state stabilization funds in the stimulus package, whose aim is to help avert reductions in educational services, to fund expected increases, and school systems have discretion to use some of this money for school modernization. Identifying school construction projects as shovel-ready projects will go a long way toward achieving the goals of the program. One of the initial comments that I'll make is that initially there was some thought that there would be more money allocated to infrastructure, and indeed the way it's played out, as you'll see during the course of the conference, is that much of it did get allocated to avoid laying off teachers and other things of that nature. But we're going to be focusing today on how to utilize the money for shovel-ready construction projects. Now, also New York State will also receive another $550 million under a different part of the stimulus program, and school modernization is also eligible for use of this funding. The most direct beneficiary of the Washington stimulus legislation will be the New York State public schools. As we said, it will be eligible for $2.5 billion additional federal aid over the next 2 years. Now to introduce our panel. Myself, I'm a practicing attorney who represents universities and school districts predominantly, doing complex construction, contracting, and litigation, and also troubleshooting when there's a problem on a project. We next have Janet Duggan, who is in project management for the firm of Janet Duggan and Associates. She's been managing projects from strategic planning through site selection, design, construction, and implementation. And Janet has been very instrumental in troubleshooting a number of school projects and also setting them up in the beginning. She has a strong budgeting, planning, project management, and financial cost control program. You're going to hear why she gets involved in doing a lot of the paperwork on regular projects with the SED, and also we're putting together grants and paperwork to go with that. She'll be talking about that. Next we have Geoff Doban, who's an architect with Gruz & Sampton. He has over 20 years of expertise in large facility programming and planning. He's experienced with fast-track and accelerated projects, which he's going to talk about today. And the reason he's on the panel is he has significant experience with K-12 construction and renovation, and has a lot of experience in trying to figure out exactly how to present things with the SED, and that's something that's going to be very pivotal in making sure the projects get shovel-ready very rapidly. And our wrap-up speaker is going to be Ernie Conrad, who's an engineer, MEP engineer with Landmark Facilities Group. Ernie is lead AP, specializing in building engineering design issues for more than 20 years. He's a licensed professional engineer in mechanical engineering in 11 states. And he's going to be talking about a lot of the energy programs that would be eligible for ARRA funding. And then to go to the basics of the funding, in this first session we did back in May, it became clear that so much of the funding is going to be used to subsidize bonds, so that when a school borrows, say, $1 million, the payback over the term of the bond would be another $1 million, so they'd actually end up owing $2 million at the end of the day. This is a very significant program because essentially the school, instead of paying back $2 million, would only be paying back $1 million because of the zero interest on the bonds. And in essence, the federal government is subsidizing paying back the bonds. And the national total on that is $11 billion. New York State totals is approximately $927 million. And the flow of the funds would go from the Department of Education, the federal level, to the state SED. And then the SED would flow discretionary funds to the local educational agencies. The deadline is for all of this to get expended is September 30, 2011. And of course, we're sort of midstream with that right now. The bonds must be used within 3 years after the issue. Okay. So getting to the guiding principles of ARRA, quite simple really. Spend quickly to save and create jobs. They have to be shovel-ready if they're going to be construction and renovation projects. Ensure transparency and accountability. There's going to be federal reporting requirements quarterly to invest wisely, improve student achievement through improving schools. And the types of facilities that are approved for ARRA funds is modernizing school facilities which are open to the community. They need to be accessible, energy efficient, up-to-date science laboratories, utilizing technology to enhance learning. Include early learning facilities that are safe and appropriate for the youngest children. Now, those are the things that are allowed. Now, the things that are not allowed, specifically in the federal legislation, can't be used simply to reduce taxes. It can't be used for increasing fund balances or creating rainy day fund balances. It can't simply go for maintenance costs. And it can't, and here's a big one, it can't go for stadiums or other facilities used primarily for athletic contests, exhibits, or other events where admission is charged. And it cannot be used to purchase or upgrade vehicles. It can't be used for improvement or construction of standalone facilities that are not used to educate children. So that means that it can't be an elaborate administration building built that isn't used to educate children. It cannot be used for school modernization, renovation, or repair that violates state law. This obviously has to be under the existing SED requirements. The impact in New York State, the federal government has already made direct allocations to New York City, Buffalo, and Rochester, so that goes directly from the federal government to the localities. The ARRA qualified school construction bonds, $192 million in 2009, 2010, they're already allocated, and $192 million in 2010 to 2011, first priority to Yonkers and Syracuse. And to talk a little bit about the legal part, I'm going to move right on past my picture there. And just talking, you're going to hear more about this from each of the speakers, but creating a shovel-ready project can be possible if there's effective planning in advance that includes all the stakeholders, the same way you would do it if you were putting together a regular project, but faster. Establishing priorities based upon picking them right out of the 5-year capital plan, which I know Janet and Jeff are both going to talk about at some length. And creating a shovel-ready project, you can see how short the deadlines are. You need to already have on board your 5-year plan. You have to select an architect and construction manager to make sure the costs line up. Not too much different than an ordinary project, but it has to be done in a much faster track. Something that we've seen be tremendously helpful is have a point person for the school district. In many instances, that is the business official for the school district, I would say most often. Occasionally, the buildings and grounds person, and sometimes an outside representative who would be managing the information flow, queuing it up for the district, which is different than the construction manager. It would be somebody that's managing all the paperwork and so on. And the other thing that goes a long way on a shovel-ready project is the business and legal terms of all the contracts must be carefully tailored to meet time frames, deadlines. It has to be more fine-tuned than an ordinary contract would be. The contract with the architect has to be clear about commitment and time and scheduling and when things have to get done. There can't be any slippage, or you lose the ability to get the funding and to get it approved by the public. There has to be a clear strategy on competitive bidding, performance and payment bonds being in place, and how to disqualify undesirable bidders, which is a fairly complex legal layout. But if you have everything lined up in advance and you have criteria, it makes it much more feasible to do so. As you probably know, you can't pre-qualify contractors, low-bid contractors, but you can set very clear criteria for levels of experience, years of experience, sizes of projects that have been done. So there's a lot of very useful things you can do up front to protect yourself and allow you to knock out a non-qualified bidder. The reason this is so important is because if the time frames get lapsed, you might lose the ability to keep and get the funding. And next, a backup plan must be in place unless, if anything falls through the cracks, there has to be a fail-safe to jump in and deal with that problem quickly. That's why the point person for the school district is so important. You need to have somebody that, ideally it's somebody who doesn't have another full-time job, so a business official or the buildings and grounds person is going to have a full-time job otherwise, and it's very difficult to do two separate jobs at the same time. So having that dedicated person to the project is important. At the top of the list in that regard is you need a top-notch financial team with experience in construction finance and experience with SED. And if you're with a district that hasn't built recently, having that team already in place is somewhat difficult. So it's a matter of drawing on resources, perhaps bringing in the right consultant to help you with that aspect of it. That becomes very time-consuming, and it has to be right, or else you don't get the proper aid and the proper funding. Now, capital planning by its nature is time-consuming and an intensive process involving, all, as we said in the outset, all the stakeholders, the teachers, the community, the administration of the school district, and the board. So getting all the stakeholders together is awfully important. Now, compressing the timeline, just to review that, the first thing is to identify the needs, be clear of what you're going after. Obviously, if you can draw from that 5-year plan, capital plan, you're really going to be in good shape. Establishing a budget up front. What money are you eligible for? How much is required for the particular improvement? Making sure the construction manager and the architect get together to make sure that cost is clear. Develop a design and be very clear about not undertaking something that's too big to get out on time. Get it approved and get it out there. Make sure again that the cost is within the budget. Set up a proper an effective bidding strategy. Develop effective contracts, starting with your architect and your construction manager, and going through to the construction contractors. And then effective management as the project goes on by the school district with budget, schedule, and troubleshooting. So that's sort of the legal wrap-up and the introduction to ARRA. And I'd like to go over to Geoff Doban to talk, Jeff, about some of the architecture issues and how to get something shovel-ready. I guess a lot of people have said to us that design ready doesn't mean shovel ready, so really infusing into your comments would have to be constructability as well as just design.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Jack. You can also skip past you there, Oriana. I'd like to just talk about a couple of things here today. First, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, outline what goes into the 5-year capital facilities plan and the importance of that in doing capital projects, and then think about some and suggest some strategies to maximize efficiency in design and constructability and construction cost, with the idea that there are some things that you can consider and have your architect consider to cut down on the design time, which will help in the overall process. Just on the 5-year capital facilities plan, what that is it's a long-term plan that is actually a new one is created every 5 years, and it's updated annually. It's very important to identify and involve key constituents in coming up with that plan. The importance is that you want to bring to the table all of the people who are interested, who are community people in the school district, not only board members, but parents, businesses, local municipal officials. You want to give them sort of a buy-in to the plan, because ultimately, as school leaders and business officials, you'll be going to this community to get money, and the more that people feel that they've had a role in the process, this will be of some great benefit to you. And you should look to your architect as a key person who can help facilitate this process. Often we've held meetings. I hesitate to call them town hall meetings in today's climate, but often something like an open house that's a bit informal, where people can come to one of your schools, and you can tell them about what you're thinking of doing in terms of long-range planning, and show them some ideas that you have and solicit ideas from them. We found that to be very effective.
If I had a question for you.
Sure.
This is a concern that often comes up, and I wanted to see what your experience has been. There's some issue. Obviously, the architect has certain responsibilities for cost estimating and figuring out how much the scope should cost. I want to know how many instances on your jobs does the district hire a construction manager at the very outset? Usually, you're the one on board. And how soon after that does
the most successful ones that we've been involved with in doing these long-term plans that will often then roll into a referendum has a construction manager who, and their basic role, or probably the most important role, is doing cost estimating and doing good, thorough, conservative cost estimating.
The hardest part is to promise the stakeholders they're getting something, and then it has to be taken out because it's too expensive.
Yeah, I mean, you never want to be in that position. So, I mean, I think the best way to do that is, you do want to take a conservative approach. I mean, we are in an economy now where it's a good buyer's market for construction services. Janet and Ernie will talk about that a little bit more. But you still want to be conservative, about it. I mean, I think I can't stress that enough. So you put some of your own contingencies into that. And it's always better to go back, you leave a little bit on the table rather than being in a position to have to ask your voters for more. So I would strongly urge that. Of course, when you do construction estimating, your estimator, your architect should be thinking about contingencies that are apparent in the budgeting, but you can also have your own contingencies in mind and hold some of that back.
Well, it certainly seems like the stakes are much higher here to get that totally right.
They are, yeah, and you have to do it, rather quickly here, as you mentioned here. So the plan is really dynamic, and it really is supposed to be updated annually. The important element of that plan is the executive summary. That is a requirement as of back in July of 2004, that executive summary accompany all individual capital construction projects that go before the SED, for review and approval. That's the route to get your building permit. The basic 5-year plan, it's fairly straightforward. The executive summary really is just a list of facilities and a brief narrative of each. and then talking about the goals for those facilities, whether it be renovation or creating new facilities or expanding existing. The building inventory is the second component. It's really looking at what you have in a more detailed manner, features and conditions of each building, and then what are the needs that stem from that inventory and solutions for each one. The third important thing is that the districts have to go through and you have to prioritize your needs. So there's a form that they have on their website that allows you to do that. But that's pretty important in SED, and looking at projects will look to that prioritization in terms of review and approval. And then looking at, as Jack mentioned, the estimated expenses for each plan year, based on what you're thinking of doing from new construction to additions or system upgrades.
What's the process for making the estimated expenses for the capital plan? Is that derived from the school business official and the architect, or? It's
basically derived from this building inventory and what rolls out of that, and then looking at the priorities. If you want to do more in year one and less in year two, then you would structure it that way. And then you would look at some of these projects are more long-term than others. I mean, clearly doing a new building, ground up, depending on the size, can take anywhere from several months to design, and then a year to complete, to being longer than that. But you would structure it that way, and then really have the cost estimator look at what your outlays are for each one of those years. So just to get into our next section here, some ways that we've worked with districts, and some things for you all to think about in terms of developing a strategy to maximize really the efficiency in design. We've looked in several instances at adaptive reuse of non-traditional facilities that can save time and money both in the planning process, but more particularly in the construction phase of a project. Given the market today, there are certainly a number of commercial facilities, and potentially in any of your respective communities where deals could be made for space, on a long-term leasing basis. And the advantage there, obviously, is that the building infrastructure is in place, and we're talking about interior construction, which has a much much quicker time frame, and is something that actually SED looks at as a separate kind of project, as a renovation rather than as a new construction. So their review times actually can be a little bit quicker. Those have some pluses and minuses. Office buildings often do not lend themselves to a school program very easily. As you know, schools are made up of academic and instructional spaces, and then what I would call big box spaces, gymnasiums, auditoriums, cafeteria. Those don't often easily fit into an office building. So another source that we have looked at are comparable facilities, particularly religious schools that are on the market. The parochial schools have had somewhat of a fall off in recent years in their demographic, and churches are often looking to either lease or sell those properties. And we found that they are actually ready-made, and in many instances, to be adaptable for particular school programs. There are some drawbacks to that as well. Often they're older buildings, and they're expensive mechanical upgrades required sometimes, accessibility, handicapped accessibility, and that sort of thing. But it's something that you should consider on an individual basis. The next, I think, as Jack and mentioned, and Janet will speak a little bit more about, identify capital improvement projects. And these are often quick projects like roof replacements, door replacements, mechanical upgrades, things that have to do with the improvement or reconstruction of the exterior envelope of your buildings. Again, those are quick projects. They're often very important ones, but if you break those out separately, you can get them reviewed quickly on a more fast-track basis by SED. Janet will, I think, speak a little bit more about that in detail. Finally, there are different things that we've done for either new construction or additions to add capacity to projects, and they really involve looking at different types of prototypes. The first type that I have here on the slide is thinking about your buildings, your school building, as a kit of parts. And what this is that you would, with your architect, develop the school as a series of modular components, classroom components, and then what we call commons components like gymnasia, cafeteria, etc. The idea here is that these components could be broken apart and recombined on different sites as you may find in your particular community. The idea here is to save redesign time, seeing that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you do a school building, but recognizing that many of these parts are, and many of these spaces and things that make up a school are reusable in a sense. So if you do it once, you don't have to do it many, many times. This can also then lead us to saving time and money. This is just a couple of examples on the next slide where we've utilized this approach in New York City, where you have often very tight sites. The second type is looking at prototypes that are actually whole building prototypes, I call them. And this is not a new idea. This has been done in many urban areas throughout the country and suburban areas too in the 50s and 60s. And that is really looking at developing a building that is essentially the same building as its own standalone thing that can be adapted to a kind of typical sites. In the case here of these illustrations, it's a kind of typical corner sites in Queens and New York. But it's simply by flipping the plan around and changing a few things on each building. It's instead of doing two separate buildings that that have their own complete identity, there's some key things that can be changed, some details and colors, to differentiate them. But the bulk of the work is really the same, and it can save an awful lot of time in doing new construction. The third type here that we've looked at is really designing and thinking about classrooms as modules. And this is not to get into anything like temporary classroom units or TCUs, which many of you may have in your districts. That's certainly not something I would advocate as a long-term solution. But it's sort of picking up on some of the same idea that you develop and that your architect designs series or groupings or modules of classrooms that can be replicated and expanded onto your existing buildings. This is often something that is more applicable to suburban models where you have a lot of space, but we have found it to be an effective way to do good design that can be tailored to a particular situation, that can be evocative and fit into a particular community, but that also saves time and money in the long run. And I'd like to turn our discussion here over to Janet Duggan, who will talk about some of the management issues and issues particularly with the State Education Department and that all-important paperwork that is so crucial in doing these projects. Janet?
Thank you. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit as we drill down in some of the details and talk about some keys to being effective and some strategies for winning different rebates or credits. We'll start with talking about some keys to being effective. Following up on Jeff's discussion, the district will have a 5-year capital facilities plan, but one of the keys to being really effective is to continually keep that updated. It needs to be done annually, but using other pieces of data you want to make sure that it's updated, number one, with your current demographics. You want to roll those demographics forward so you can understand the impact of your population on your schools. You also want to work with some of your educational stakeholders to understand what's happening in educational philosophy and how you have broken up your grading structure and the impact that that grading structure has on your facility. And thirdly, you have transportation issues on how your different schools are structured. And what we want to try to do here is to have the facility support the overall educational philosophy. Second, you want to take time now, as Jeff mentioned, with some of the strategies to get the stakeholder approvals and support for some of the projects that you want to do. Also, being effective by doing research so that you know all the different avenues for stimulus money, rebates, credits, and cost-saving techniques. And when you're doing this research, you really want to check those deadlines very carefully. And I'll talk a little bit later about many different areas. As you can see with the ARRA funding, much of it for the first year is already allocated, and the second year there are some large urban schools that are really targeted. But we still need to be very proactive because there are other avenues of stimulus money, and we don't know how things will change as we get into the next years.
There are some very stringent reporting requirements on that money in the Obama administration's attempts to make that as transparent as possible has had the effect of slowing down some of that because you have to keep up with the
Right, it's quarterly federal reporting, and it's very detailed, not only on money, but we'll talk about it a little bit later, but the focus is really on job creation and job saved, and job creation both in the short term and long term. Another advantage or key to being really effective is to use these current economic times to really push for value. There certainly is an advantage to being counter-cyclical, as I'll talk a little later when you look at some of the cost savings, both in construction and professional services fees. It really is a good time to begin projects. As Jeff was talking about ways of, and Jack, on how you want to structure your project, you can be very effective by working with your architect to develop design alternatives and including those design alternatives when you go out to competitively bid. It helps get the best quality. It's another methodology to pick and choose with the alternatives to get your project in the budget where you need it to be, and can also be used when you're looking at selecting contractors and subcontractors. We also recommend that it is a good time to perhaps research and learn about professional services firms. Quite often, school construction has had a narrow group of architects, engineers, project managers, construction managers. What we're seeing in these times is that we can open those doors. We can investigate many qualified firms that perhaps have done private school work or other institutional work. And it's a good time to begin to talk to some of those firms.
I was going to say, Jen, is I think the downside to that is that if you're not familiar with the red tape of getting something approved, that could be a downside to it.
It could.
New players.
But sometimes the business official does know what needs to be done. Sometimes the architect can take the lead and help CM
learn the paperwork that's required. And again, with everything being up on the internet, it's very easy to get all of the forms and get up to speed on what's required. It's just an opportunity to open the window and see what's out there. Another thing I think that's really important to really being effective is to really understand what things cost. And we call this benchmarking, where you might want to see how your district's project, maybe you've just completed a project, or as you're going forward with a new project, and you want to know what new building costs should be, maybe what your utility costs are running, what energy savings projects some of your neighboring school districts are doing. It's a good time to reach out and share. I find in this economy that there is more sharing of this information, and not only just public schools. You might want to do benchmarking if there's a private school in your area, if an institution has been, maybe your library has put on a new edition or is building. There might be corporations in your area or nonprofit organizations. Again, it's a good time to research and learn about what's out there. Next, I want to talk a little about winning strategies and helping clients get NYSERDA credits. What I have found is that it's very important to first tell a compelling story. Understand why you're going after a particular credit, what's important or unique about your project. You want to frame the issues. You want to describe perhaps the problem or what would occur if the project you're presenting doesn't get done. You might want to walk through the alternatives that have been researched and kind of the cost models that you've looked at that bring you to a strong recommendation for whatever the project is. Ernie will talk a little more about NYSERDA, but if you're going for energy credits, you will be working, your engineers will start the case for the recommended components of the project, but the NYSERDA engineers will also actually model what you're trying to achieve and will actually show the cost savings. For the ARRA funding, they focus very strongly on jobs, and here you would want to clarify the jobs that are being created in the short term, which might be construction jobs that are generated, and in the long term, if you're adding on, which will enable you perhaps to have a full-day kindergarten or a pre-kindergarten program or additional classes that would result in additional teachers being hired, and then also in job saves. If you're going after NYSERDA, some of the other credits, they'll really also want to focus on savings. Some of the advantages to being proactive: you want to be first in line for the current rebates, discounts, and credits that are out there. And some of those include the ARRA, NYSERDA, E-rate, which is the telecommunications funding from the federal government, is still available, again, if you're building a new school or a significant
We've had some very good results with that, right, Janet? Really?
Yes. Again, it is linked to your aid, your school aid rate, and we worked on it with a school district that had a very high aid ratio and ended up achieving 90% savings for the telecommunications infrastructure for cabling in the new school.
Did you find it at all a problem, though, in the construction phase? Because I recall some work in New Jersey where E-rate was an issue, that a lot of the work that you would normally put under the the general construction contractor, or in this case one of the multiple primes is still in New York State, that work was actually pulled out and would have to be done by yet, another contractor, the E-rate contractor. It really has to do with who puts in the infrastructure for it. Literally, who does the drops, who does the back boxes, that kind of thing. It's work that you want done when the walls are open. Not easy to have, to bring some party in, who's sort of not a part of the mix, have them do that work, and then, coordination issues. Was that a problem for you at all?
It was
if
more,
it was, how'd you deal with it?
it is an issue, and it, for us, had more to do with the planning, because E-rate had different deadlines that needed to be met.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was important to get your application in and to get it funded. Then to go through and very specifically look at each component, because putting in the conduit, for example, is an electrical trade issue, which you would want in the general, in the construction package to be bid with the electrical subcontractor, and then the actual cabling pulls were done with the E-rate vendor. And again, there were filings that needed to be done. There were very strict deadlines that you had to meet. And the other issue is that there is some upfront, the way the funding comes back to you. You need to pay your bills currently, and the funding comes
So
later.
you were able to structure it as a kind of logical, contractor,
Yes.
Activity thing. For some reason, we weren't. We had, some third party putting in conduit. It was sort of a mess. But,
You have to do it.
Yeah.
You have to know that it's going to be an E-rate project
Right.
early on so that you have the time to structure that.
The other thing on that one is that really Janet became the point person for coordinating that whole project, so you were in a good position to do that.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And the other reason to be proactive is, we just gave an example, if you try to coordinate and really implement these savings. And we also want to be prepared for any future stimulus incentives that are coming down. We don't know what they are, but the better prepared, having plans and even getting through some design so that you have a really good sense of what your district needs to do so that you are in a position to move quickly. Taking the time now to do the planning, to explore alternatives, and to engage your stakeholders so that you can, as Jack mentioned, get on a fast track to get a project approved. And this is also a great opportunity to create value for your district. Just some reasons to think about starting projects now. Again, we have the ARRA funding. We have NYSERDA credits, which Ernie will talk a little more about. We talked about the E-rate telecommunications funding. And it is a very competitive economic climate. Just to give you a few statistics that are out there, we see that construction materials and labor are significantly down. Looking at a Turner index, they're stating that construction costs since January are down 10.77%. Looking at some of the statistics from the AIA database, petroleum products are down 20%, lumber plywood is down 14%. Also, professional services are down. Some of the AIA statistics, architectural firms have lost 14% of their employees. And looking at what's happening in educational spending is down about 8.2%. So in this economic climate, there are lots of both professional service and construction firms that are very eager to get work. Some districts might have put projects out to bid in the 2005, 6, 7 era when prices were increasing substantially. Districts might have had projects come in above the voter authorization. Those projects might have been shelved. This might be a good time to go back and look at some of those. Perhaps this cost, if you're in the 20% overage range, it might be a good time to look at those again, and with some of the techniques that Jeff talked about, some value engineering and just competitive costs, you might be able to get that project down. There have also been some minor changes in the Wicks Law amendment, which went in 2008, which enables some of the smaller projects. The limits are up to $3 million in New York City, $1.5 million in Westchester, Nassau, and Suffolk, and $500,000 in other upstate regions. And there's a big push upstate to really have this Wicks Law amended so that you could go, instead of having individual contracts for mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and then a general trades, and then needing a CM to oversee all the individual subcontractors, to give each district the freedom to decide how to structure the construction contracts, either CM holding contracts, CM as agent, or a general contractor arrangement.
What's the likelihood of that type of legislation passing? I mean, I know it's been attempted over the years. Maybe you can speak to that too.
Well, actually, that one, the part that Janet just was citing, went into effect July 1st, 2008.
Okay.
The other thing that went into effect at the same time is that if you implement a project labor agreement, that you don't have to follow Wicks Law either. There's another exemption. Even over those dollar thresholds, you can be exempted from it that way. And that has some complexity to it, but I've seen it in more and more districts entering it. You have an agreement with the unions about work requirements and wages and so on. So it's something that's beneficial, especially down closer to New York City, the counties that are, Westchester and Rockland, Orange, very, very useful in parts of Long Island as well.
I just reiterate, and to Janet's point, that the hitting the market at the right time is just of extreme importance. I mean, that can just save a lot of money. If you compare that with savings that you might get out of VE items, it's just another world. You could look at 10 to 20% in terms of just being in the market at the right time versus doing value engineering where you pick up a couple of percentage points there. I mean, one is just peanuts compared to the other.
So you're really bringing value back to your district.
Yeah, the timing is really critical. That's worth a lot.
Yeah, and then the fact that the ARRA funds deal with zero interest bonds. I mean, that's something that the first time we talked about this back in May with the group, everybody said, well, that doesn't help us that much. But when you do the math, it's an incredible savings. So you put the construction savings on top of the fact that you can get some zero interest bonds, and you're to the extent you can eke it out and get your voters to approve it, it's really got a lot of value.
Now I'll turn it over to Ernie, who will talk about how you can even get additional savings looking at the energy savings.
Thank you, Janet. My first slide, it says, what's in it for me? And what we're really going to talk about is energy savings measures and different ways of achieving those. And so what we want to do to begin with is we want to kind of take a look and create project categories. And what I've shown here is I've created 4 categories. The first we call low-hanging fruit. These are things that require very little to get them going, and you get a very good payback for them. And the next group is long payback, but high project value. Okay? The value is in energy savings, but sometimes the paybacks are much, much longer. The third group is we call high first cost projects. And then the fourth group is the types of projects that have opportunities for third-party financing. So if we look at low-hanging fruit, these are projects that the simple things. If you think about energy-saving things, many of these things, NYSERDA keeps getting mentioned. Any person who has an electric bill, and on their electric bill there is a fine line item, and in that item is you're putting money up so you can get it back again. And NYSERDA is that agency that gives you that money back. And almost everybody who's buying electricity in New York State becomes eligible for NYSERDA money. And they look at these types of things, simple little things. You think of a thermostat. We take a standard thermostat and change it to a programmable thermostat. The paybacks on these things many times like 6 months. Same thing, demand ventilation. What that is that if you take sensors and you put them in a building and you measure the carbon dioxide in the building, you can reduce the amount of code required outside ventilation air unless it's absolutely necessary. So there's huge savings in these kinds of things. Sensors for lighting. These are occupancy sensors. Turn lights off when there's nobody around. Waterless urinals are becoming very popular. You're now allowed to use them. Most of the places you now are allowed to use waterless urinals. Some people chuckle, but they're great. The amount of water they save is, and the unions are not complaining because they still pipe up pipes to it. So other things, some of your appliances you have, kitchen hoods, they have tremendous amounts of energy waste because outside of a kitchen hood. So look for ways to change those to more efficient things. In lighting, there's an incredible thing going on in the lighting industry with all these LED types of light fixtures now, where you use maybe 1/100th the amount of wattage that you used before. And there's a tremendous payback for those things. Other things I mentioned, like a white roof. For those who don't know what a white roof is, there's a thing that's called a heat island effect. And what that is if you have a roof that's black, it absorbs heat from the sun. And if I have a roof that's white, it reflects it back out into the atmosphere. And so there's a lot to be said when we talk about a carbon footprint, trying to reduce that amount of heat island effect. Okay, so what we want to do with these things is these are fairly simple things that we talked about having projects get bid versus other ways. These are usually types of things that what you can do instead of trying to go through and create a long specification and all that, is you go to a variety of contractors and you ask them for proposals. So you get 3 or 4 written proposals from contractors. It saves you the time of having to create a bid document. They're fairly simple things, and now you've got your competitive pricing and you've got the contractors. So it's an easy thing to do, and you don't have to get into great detail until you get into some of the other types. And that's when we talk about the long payback but high project value. Right now, these are the larger projects. Things like geothermal projects are becoming very, very popular now. For basically, you drill into the ground and you use the heat of the earth as a technique to heat and cool a building. PV, as photovoltaics, solar, these have really high first cost. They definitely have energy savings in the long run. Other things are like window shading. There's a lot of things you can do to the envelope of the building, and you get a great value from it over the long haul. But in the beginning, there's a substantial amount of investment to start with.
Ernie, I have a question. In terms of geothermal and photovoltaic and solar, are there space limitations or feasibility limitations that would restrict different districts from?
There are. You have to look at each building on a case basis. Typically, what we do in a geothermal project, you look at the school and you look at the amount of land that they own, and the favorite spot for putting geothermal projects is in a parking lot, because they know you're not going to grow trees in the parking lot. Because what happens is the roots of trees will get into these systems and destroy them. So we do parking lots. The other thing is football fields. Quite often you'll see out in the football field there's a whole geothermal system underneath these guys running around in helmets. In the photovoltaics, many of your schools have a flat roof, and it's ideal. The flat roof is the best thing in the world for photovoltaics. And to go one step further, I mentioned about third-party financing. There's a lot of people out there right now that are looking for flat roofs. And what they will do is they will come to you, they'll knock on your door, they'll say, I want to put photovoltaics on your roof. Is that okay? You definitely want to say yes, because they will pay for it. And you will get back from them, you'll have an agreement for purchasing energy, and and you'll get a cost reduction in your energy consumption pricing, and at the same time, you're doing a photovoltaic program.
Why does flat roof work better for that, or is it just because you have the flexibility?
Well, you have the ability to put you put them on an angle if you want to, and plus just the simplicity of the installation and constructability of it all, because it's very fast. Okay. The other is we talk about high first cost projects. These are the kinds of projects that start, get involved in the envelope of the building. Many times, in kitchen areas, there's a very expensive equipment in there, boilers and chillers, building management systems. And what these projects are is they don't necessarily have any really payback. And the reason why is because if you take like a boiler, it's outlived its useful life. It needs to be replaced. So this is an opportunity to replace it. But yes, you're going to have the new boiler you buy is going to be more efficient than the other one, but at the same time, only a piece of that is an energy-related component. The other thing is the basic replacement of a piece of equipment that's either worn out or its size is incorrect. It needs to be larger or smaller size. So those are the third group is these high first cost projects. And then, so where do I start? What we need to do, and it's been mentioned before by Janet, we need to sell our projects. So how do we sell our projects? Well, what we can do is a couple basic things. First thing we want to do is we want to collect a year's worth of energy bills. And this is how you can benchmark yourself. We mentioned the benchmark before, but simply is you take the square footage of your building, you take up the dollars of all your energy bills for 1 year, divide one over the other, and if you're a school, see if your numbers in that range of $1.50 a square foot per year. In my business, I do a lot of benchmarking, and we'll see a building that has some air conditioning in it, and it operates on like a commercial building, where it's predominantly in the 5 days of the week. We'll see something anywhere between $1.50 and $2 a square foot per year as your energy bill. So benchmark yourself. See which side of that number you're on. Next thing you want to do is you want to survey your building. Look at the architectural elements in the building. Survey all the MEP elements in the building. There's the mechanical, the electrical, the plumbing things in the building. Tabulate your other operating costs, your water costs and sewer costs, and then go back to that 5-year plan that you got sitting there and review it. Go through the priorities, identifying those items for the priority needs in that plan. So those are the things you put together to get started. And then once you get that going, the next thing you want to do is you're going to have to follow some fairly different rules than you've seen before. And this is where you get into the 2007 ASHRAE 90.1. This is the energy standard. What the stimulus legislation has mandated that if you're going to do any kind of energy projects, and if you're going to do almost all your projects are going to involve energy one way or another, you're going to be mandated to use the 2007 version of the ASHRAE standard 90.1.
Maybe talk a little bit about what the ASHRAE standard is.
Yeah, okay. What the ASHRAE standard is, it's the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers. And these are the people who write it's code language for what you have to do when you build a building or you install air conditioning equipment or heating equipment, primarily energy-consuming equipment in buildings. And these people, I happen to be one of the members of that committee. There's 43 of us all together that write this code language for all of the United States, and it tells people how you build your buildings and how efficient that they have to be. And if you look at where you are now, for the most part in the United States, and definitely in New York State, people work to the 2004 version of the ASHRAE standard. When you look at the 2007 version, it is about another 15% more energy conservative than the old 2004 measurement. And right now we are doing our deliberations for the 2010 version. In 2010, we've been mandated by Congress that we have to be 30% more efficient than we were in 2004. So there's another 15% ratchet that's coming at us. And there's some very interesting things that are being that are going to be mandated, and we have to do in our energy savings. So the things you'll see here, these are very much as NYSERDA gets involved, and many of these pieces and parts to give you rebates.
Maybe also say what NYSERDA is for those who don't know.
NYSERDA is the New York State Research and Development Authority. And what they are is when you pay your electric bill each month, there's a piece of that bill that goes into a pot of money. And that pot of money is managed by NYSERDA. And they take that pot of money and they give it back to people in several different ways. One way is through just straight out rebates, and you get some very efficient motors, or you buy air conditioning equipment that's extra energy efficient. They will give you money back, and it's cash back. Fill out the form. It's a very easy thing to do. Get cash back. They also help you when you get into the modeling of buildings. To do the total building energy analysis, they will pay for that. They have some very substantial funding that they will do for individuals. It's about 4 or 5 different categories where they can get money back to you.
So it's really worth looking at the website. They have been around for a very long time.
That's right.
People, very few people know about it.
That's right.
We've seen some businesses here that have taken advantage of it and gotten as much as $250,000 on one single piece of equipment.
Absolutely, yep, right. And it's changing. It's constantly changing. Each year, they have a different budget. And so, depending upon what they have in that pot of money, that pot of gold, they will change the amount of rebates. And sometimes they had at one point, they were given as much as $400 for every kilowatt that you could reduce your energy consumption. It has been a long time since we've seen that big number, but it's still a substantial amount you get back.
The other thing that they're offering for schools is the free energy benchmarking service.
Right.
So if you're a school district and you want to know how energy efficient you are, you can check NYSERDA and they will do that for you.
And that's definitely just worth looking at their website, regardless of whether it's stimulus. I mean, totally unrelated to stimulus money. NYSERDA is a force in itself.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. Yep. So the things that you're going to see are going to be different when you implement a project now with the new 2007 ASHRAE standard. They have new requirements for the building envelope, insulation, thermal heat transfer characteristics, windows. They're starting to demand that you have insulating glass. Almost every piece of parts you think of the building. Roofing insulation has increased. In lighting, as an example, in your schools, the new power densities for lighting in schools is 1.2 watts per square foot maximum lighting level that you put into a school building. These are some new things that you're going to be seeing. You can actually get a hold of this 2007 ASHRAE standards. They're available for purchase, and most mechanical engineering firms have these in any event. HVAC systems, again, they've ratcheted up the mandatory efficiency for these things. In appliances, they've taken the efficiency of motors and made them become much, much greater. And they touched upon plumbing a little bit, but not an awful lot. Okay, so what do I choose? Well, the things we choose is we go back, we look at the benchmarking exercise we've done, and we look at the payback analysis. What we're trying to do is identify low-hanging fruit. And this low-hanging fruit is things like I mentioned, like thermostats, lighting retrofits, these kinds of things. Small amount of money, and you get this huge payback on it. So these are great things that you can choose. You don't necessarily even need to have stimulus money in some cases just to do these things because the payback is so rapid. Look at those rebate opportunities, like we just mentioned with NYSERDA, and target high visibility needs. One thing we need, because we say we have to sell these projects. So what we think we can show people is, and this happens very much with the federal government, if I can show the federal government, if I spend $1 of their money and it gets back $2, you got yourself a project. The more that you can get back on the money you spend, the more you get to the top of the list of the project that somebody's going to choose. So these are things we call cost-benefit analysis. This is the cost of the project versus the dollars that you get back in its value. And if you can show that positive side, you're at the top of the pile for being chosen. So what do I do next? Well, we need to document your project. That means you need to have drawings, specifications. That's very much part of this whole thing we need to do next. We need to do energy-saving calculations. Those have to be documented and be in place. Renderings. The more you can have pictures, diagrams, because these projects are going to be reviewed by individuals. People are going to look at this and try and figure out what it's all about. And the more you can get them to understand it, the better your chances. So diagrams for evaluating, for evaluators to look at. Photographs. Photographs are great. The picture's worth 1,000 words. The more you can put photographs in so some reviewer can understand your project and see what its true value is, the better you're off. Your cost estimates, make sure you have accurate cost estimates. You need to have either reliable bids. Many people will have professional cost estimators go through it, like a construction manager does this quite often, or having your contractor written proposals with hard dollars. So that gives you the accuracy, and the people reviewing your proposals, when they can see the fact that there's accuracy to your estimates, you're much further ahead of the game. And you make a value statement. The most important thing about that value statement, which you said it over and over again, is jobs. How many jobs are you going to create with that dollar? And after the dollar's been spent and the building's been built, how many new jobs are you going to have on top of the ones that were involved in actually doing the work? Okay, so those jobs is a very, very important piece of what you need. Okay, paperwork help. There's a lot of forms that are going to be involved, so we've touched upon this a couple of times here. And don't try and go it alone. Many people, if you've done these things on a regular basis, you might be okay, but by and large, you really don't want to go along on it all by yourself. Get legal assistance. So many times people have never written a grant before. Don't try and make grant writing the first thing you've ever done. Don't be afraid to go to a professional grant writer. If these people do this for a living, why not? Get a professional to help you write your grant. These people know how to write grants to get people to get your funds that you're going to need. And the financial programs out there, we said, like NYSERDA, these are changing daily. So you have to look at these programs all the time and watch for change, and the change is going to be helpful to you. And finally, where's the money at? Well, in low-hanging fruit, you have choices. You might be able to use your own money, but then again, if you have it and the money is out there, it's a very easy thing to get money for low-hanging fruit types of things. The not so low-hanging fruit, this is really where that grant comes in, because it's you're going to be spending a larger upfront money. You're going to have definite energy savings that goes with it, and so what's going to happen is this is where this team is going to get involved, and we go through this government maze. It's just I can't say how many times. Don't go it alone. Look at professionals. Get the architect. Get the legal assistant, and all those kinds of things to get this put together using people that have been there before. And with that, I'm going to ask if Janet has any comment on this paper jungle.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Janet about that, because Janet obviously has done a lot of digging to understand ARRA better and has put together a number of proposals. And then, of course, I think the compelling thing is the story. You then have to take all those technical details and develop a story. So maybe talk a little bit about that experience, the methodology of how you go about doing it, how you might interact, how a school business official would interact with that process.
Well, maybe I can talk specifically about an ASHRAE project that we got approved for, it wasn't a school, but another, for a nonprofit association that was building a building. And one of the key components was, again, in the planning phase, that you needed to start early, because NYSERDA has to approve the project in the planning stage. And the first thing we did, we worked with the engineer that we had hired. We looked at all the options for how we were going to develop the heating and air conditioning system for the building. also any of the other requirements. This happened to be a showroom and educational training facility, so acoustics were important. In the occupancy was very variable, as it was a training facility, wouldn't be occupied all the time. So there were opportunities for the CO2 sensing, for daylighting, for having custom rooftop units for the specialized needs. They needed to be very insulated and quiet because of the acoustic as your top floor of the building, and you have these top units. So our engineer looked through many of the alternatives. We had then decided, we looked at geothermal at the time, looked at all of the initial costs versus payback. This is all as a project team. With the engineer's guidance, decided on what we thought was the best alternative. Then approaching NYSERDA, they have engineers. They looked at the requirements that our engineer had put together and built a model to look at what kinds of savings could be achieved. And you need to have time for this modeling and approval to take place. And then you are approved in the program. But it doesn't really stop there. Then you need the coordination as you go out to build, and as the mechanical subcontractor is hired, the shop drawings of what is actually going to be built also have to be coordinated back to NYSERDA. So each step of the way, they need to sign off that what you're building is what they've modeled. They come out at the end, after the system is installed, for what they call a commissioning phase. Now the systems are all run, and they again make sure with their checklist that you've put in place everything that they've approved. Then they don't stop there. They want to model this both through the cooling system and through the heating system, and make sure, again, that the model assumptions are actually being achieved. So it is a long, somewhat cumbersome process, but for this client, at the end of the day, with their rooftop units and their building management system, we were able to bring them $325,000 in real savings. So for them, it was worth the effort to go through kind of the laborious steps to get this through.
And actually, it's actually a 2-for-1, because not only do they get this money up front, but they also, over the life cycle of the building, now have an extremely energy efficient facility. And so you keep on saving money by the avoidance of writing those big checks out on your electric and your fuel bills. So you can't go wrong. It's well worth all the paperwork, as much as you hate paperwork.
Yeah. So it's an arduous process. I see that some of the questions that Donna's going to go over with us relate to some of these specific aspects. And I would say the other thing is that in answering the questions, some of them were pretty specific. So we probably could give you some additional feedback. We'll try to do the best we can with answering them. But there's probably some further feedback. So Donna, do you want to go through the questions?
Yes, but before I do, Leo, if you'd please let people know how they can ask an audio question.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time we'll conduct the question and answer session. If you'd like to ask a question, please press 7# on your phone now, and you'll be placed in the queue in the order received. Please listen for your name or location to be announced, and be prepared to ask your question when prompted. We are now ready to begin.
Thank you. We have 5 questions so far, and we'll start with the first one that came in from Jean Civic. And Jean wants to know, will these shovel-ready projects receive a priority status with facilities planning in their approval process?
That's a good question, and we've actually broached that issue. I don't know if we have a definitive answer, but the answer is that
I think Carl is
yes.
working on it,
Yeah.
and I think the advantage of he has said that his priorities for and now we're talking about 2010, 2011 funds. And the priorities are to Yonkers and Syracuse, and I think it probably depends on what projects they have ready. And then looking at the money that is remaining, he has not posted any, as far as we can tell, we haven't seen any specific criteria for the remainder of the money. So I would say that if you have a shovel-ready project, it's definitely worth the effort to apply. And certainly you would be ahead of any district that is still very early in the planning phase.
Does this mean shovel-ready projects that haven't received building permit approvals in this case?
I think that's what the question is getting at. Is how do you get through the
how do you
get through the SCD process?
How do you get your approval? So you got your thing designed, but it hasn't gone through that review.
Part of it is the backlog is much less than it was when
the backlog is less, and if you can break it into, they'll review on a faster basis simpler projects.
Right.
Like it takes a reviewer a lot less time to review a roof replacement job than it does for them to review a whole ground-up building with multiple systems and many more pages of documentation that they have to go to. If you have so often in doing these larger bond referenda for districts, we've done that in the past where we've broken it out that way. That all these things that are simple, you can bang out the design quickly. You can bang out the approvals, faster. Get that going, while we're planning, for the kind of longer range things like, new construction that just takes more time.
But here, what I would say, a lot of this, I would work on the compelling story, and if you're going after the specific ARRA funds, I would really focus on the job creation and the job savings, understanding why you're doing this in the long run, if this enables new programs, new teachers. I think beside having it shovel-ready, I think it's the story you're telling and meeting those criteria. If you are really, by doing this project, being able to save or add jobs, I think that would add to it.
Right.
Okay, the next question is from Beth Gillette, and it seems to me like you've answered part of this, and Beth actually sent us two. Her first one is, how do we better meet the challenges of the length of time for SCD approval? And then the second is, where does the public approval come into under ARRA?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something we've been kicking around here. Is you certainly have to have the voter approval to move forward with it.
Yes, it's my understanding also. And these, if we have these questions, we can perhaps
re-raise them.
Re-raise them with Carl and get some definitive answers. But the way we understand the process, these shovel-ready projects need to have voter approval. So when you apply for the funds, if you get the funds, you know that the project is going forward.
Okay. And another question is from Richard LaRose. And Richard says, it was noted that ARRA funds for the first year, 2009, are already allocated, and that funds for the second year, 2010, are targeted for urban school projects. So how do upstate school districts secure funds for shovel-ready projects? And the other part to his question is, relative to ARRA and trying to be first in line, does that mean these funds would only be available in 2011, which is the last year of availability?
I would say it's like the lottery. You can only win if you're in it. So that I would strongly suggest that if you have a shovel-ready, voter-approved project, that you go through the paperwork to apply. I think the stimulus money came on the state very quickly. They are working very diligently to address how to spend it, how to report on it. They're trying to streamline it. what we're reporting back is our understanding of how it's going to work, and we never know what new funds may be available. I'm not sure exactly how much of the money that's allocated for 2010-11 is going to the 2 urban districts. So I feel that you don't have that much to lose if you have a project that you really need to do that the voters have approved. I would definitely go for it. And depending what the project is, I wouldn't just stop at the ARRA money. I would see if you can get E-rate money. I would do this NYSERDA energy evaluation look, and I would try to apply everywhere I can.
Okay, thank you. Now another question from Paul Milograno. He says, we already have a project in design. It was approved by voters in April of 2009. Project has 4 phases. Phase 3 and 4 design are under design. More than 70% of work involves mechanical systems. Is it too late to take advantage of ARRA for science room renovations or NYSERDA for energy improvements? If not, where do we start?
It sounds like the question is, if the money's already been spent, does it now?
Well, the voters have already approved it.
But is stuff that's in construction?
No, it's just in design.
It's just the design.
Okay.
The money is approved.
So the money's not been spent, though?
No.
Okay.
So the answer is
So
that
it's not too late.
you'd have adequate time to.
Yeah, I think there's usually, usually when the referendum is approved, it's supposed to be for specific things, but in my experience, that's not written in stone in the actual program of construction. The program of planning and construction can be subject to modification as things change. I mean, if it's $50 million or something, I don't know what the size of it is. But
break out pieces
say
of
it's $50 million, yeah, and you have, some later phases can change. I mean, we've had instances where there was money left over, and they added project, and then the tack that the attorneys took was that, well, you're under the budget, so it's fair game.
It's more if something ran over, you'd have a problem. I think.
It's more if you ran over, yeah.
Yeah.
That's before. So obviously,
It's not uncommon to do things out of sequence.
Right.
So
Just
you
pull
want to
it
do
out.
phase 4 before phase 2?
and those are kind of ideal things, like a science lab upgrade is, that's something
Fits right
you can
into it.
design kind of quickly, because it's
And I think if
limited
it's
scope and.
If it's only in design, you have time for both the ARRA and NYSERDA.
Mm-hmm.
What might happen, you might have a timeline. I don't know if there's a requirement when this needs to be completed. If you're going for NYSERDA specifically, it may delay your schedule because you have to do this NYSERDA modeling to get it approved. So again, we just need to look at both the process, the funding, and the schedule. Mm-hmm. But if you're flexible on those, I would, again, definitely recommend going forward.
Okay, and one other question, and this is from Eugene Siv, and he says, can ARRA money be used for environmental cleanup of toxic material, and how do you apply for funds?
Would this be like, for hazardous materials abatement in a building, or site? I guess it depends on where it is. I mean, if it's
when you look at
he said it's on the site.
okay.
The bottom line for all this stuff that Backlight talked about, for every dollar you spend, you get back $2. They're looking for people to get jobs, and they're looking for jobs for the long haul, not just for your project alone. They want to create jobs. So you're talking construction, really. You're talking things that are going to have jobs out there for a long, long time. More teachers.
That one depends on the storyline. I think I can think in my mind why there's some impetus to cover that.
Yeah.
I would say that's not in any literature we've read, but I can think of some.
It's not
rationale.
Specifically mentioned as a plus, and it's not specifically mentioned that you can't do it.
Yeah, usually that kind of money, or maybe it's different with the ARRA money, but typically there's some limitations. Janet, you might be more familiar with this than me, but that this money usually it can't be used for, it's got to be used on educational facilities, or it's not.
Yeah, it has to relate to education.
You can't use it just to clean up a site, something like that, unless you're going to do something with it.
It has to be connected into something else. So if you're building something on top of that site, I mean, there may be an argument there.
Right. I think we need some more specific details about the specifics of the project, the hazard, why now. But there may be.
I just remember
offline we might need to.
I remember there being some restrictions on what constitutes aidable versus not aidable in terms of the type of work that you do, whether it's just if it's just for site-related work. That was a problem. You just didn't get the aid money couldn't go towards that.
Right.
Whereas if it somehow was tied in with the actual instructional facility, it was.
So it's cleanup so that she can produce a project on top of that state.
Right.
Right. That's what I was thinking.
Right.
That's where I was going with it. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's something we certainly could give some more thought to if you'd like to email us.
Yes, these questions will be available to us.
That's great.
So we can have them, and you'll be able to follow up, and we can provide the information online to our listeners.
Oh, that's great.
Mm-hmm. We only have a few minutes here. Any last words of wisdom to tie together information, or any thoughts that you've had now looking at the questions that people have asked?
Well, I think the key theme that we've run across as we've prepared for the May program and for this one is that you have to do an awful lot of digging and ask a lot of questions, and keep a close eye on the SED's website about the ARRA funds. There are some regulations that we thought would come down around July 1st. That wasn't able to happen. That's for SED. A number
because they allocated all the funds.
Right. Things happen pretty quickly. So I think Janet's comment probably is the closing remark, which really is you have to be in it to win it. And we're very enthusiastic that if you dig in and you really are tenacious, there's something good will come of this. And it may not be ARRA funds, it may be NYSERDA funds, it may be E-rate, but as we prepared this, which was really focused on ARRA, we really have tripped across, and as we dig in, to many opportunities that exist out there that are within your reach. So any other closing comments? I think that's our theme. So thank you very much, Donna, and we've enjoyed it a great deal.
Okay, well, thank you. And we thank all of our listeners. You will be getting a recording of this webinar, and we do ask you to complete the survey that you'll be receiving shortly. And thank you all for participating. Our next webinar is October 14. It's tax-sheltered annuities, checking for excessive contributions, and that's going to be by Greg Diefenbach of AXA Advisors. So thank you all for joining us today, and look forward to having you on another New York State ASBO webinar.
This concludes today's webinar. Thank you for attending.
The moderator has ended the conference. Goodbye. Thank you for calling.